Welcome to today's webinar, Getting Started with Your User Pools in Amazon Cognito. Our presenter today is Tim Hunt. Tim is a Senior Product Manager for AWS Mobile. We also have Vikram Madan, Senior Product Manager, and David Barozzi, Software Development Engineer. They will serve as our webinar moderators and will engage with you and answer your questions throughout the presentation while Tim presents. Tim, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Hi, thank you. Everyone, this is Tim Hunt. I'm glad you're all here and joined in with this webinar, and I'm glad we have a chance to discuss Amazon Cognito and the Your User Pools functionality. Let's dive right in here. This first slide has the topics we're going to cover today. I'm going to give you a little bit of context with AWS mobile services, some of the ones that are available that you might be interested in. We'll focus then in on Amazon Cognito. And then we'll start getting into more depth with an introduction to Your User Pools, the newer piece of Amazon Cognito that we launched a couple months back in public beta. I'll go through a summary of features, give you some of the details that are some of the advantages and some of the ways you can use user pools. I'll give you a demo, so I'll show you through our console how you can quickly and easily set up a user pool, and then I'll switch over to an app to show you an app that's using a user pool. I'll have a couple of areas where I'll dive a little deeper to give you some more details that might help you understand how some of the pieces work and help you get started. And then that'll lead into a slide at the end where I'll give you a pointer to some resources that can help you get started for using Cognito and your user pools. And then lastly, at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And really throughout the presentation, you can enter your questions in chat. So we'll be answering questions along the way, and we'll spend some time at the end going through a few of those. This slide has a nice cloud of some logos of some of the top mobile apps. We're really happy to have these customers of ours using the mobile services that we have at AWS. We know that these companies have chosen AWS and mobile services because we eliminate a lot of the heavy lifting that comes with developing a mobile app. We know when you're developing a mobile app, you really want to focus on what's special about your app, what makes it unique, what's its core functionality that's going to distinguish it. And you don't want to spend a lot of time on the heavy lifting. We often call this the undifferentiated heavy lifting. That's managing a back end, thinking about servers, thinking about scaling, thinking about managing those. So we provide those mobile services to help you with a lot of these areas. I'm going to go through this summary of some of the mobile services that you might want to draw upon, give you an overview. You can find a lot more about these at our website in our documentation, but to make sure you're familiar with some of these if you aren't already. A lot of your user experiences are going to start with authentication, and Amazon Cognito is the way to handle that. And that's really what we're going to focus a lot more time on here. But if you're starting with authenticating your users, Amazon Cognito gives you a lot of options there. You may want some server-side logic, and an increasingly popular pattern these days is to use a service, it's Amazon Lambda, which allows you to develop a serverless architecture. If you're not that familiar with Lambda, it's very interesting, particularly for mobile developers, when you don't want to think about setting up, again, hosts and scaling and managing servers. It allows you just to create your code, and Lambda will run that code as a function on demand, scale it automatically, and handle a lot of the maintenance. So Lambda is something that you ought to take a look at for server-side logic if you haven't already. Another part of Cognito we'll touch on briefly is the ability to synchronize data. So if you're synchronizing across devices and to the cloud, there's a portion of Cognito called Sync that allow you to do that. And then if you're analyzing user behavior or you're tracking retention of users, Amazon Mobile Analytics provides a really easy way to handle those pieces. You may be familiar with Amazon S3. It's a great way to store and share media. And if you want to deliver that media through a CDN, we offer Amazon CloudFront. It's a way to improve your coverage around the world. If you want to send push notifications, we've got Amazon SNS with mobile push. And just earlier this week, SNS launched global SMS. So it's now got a global SMS service to deliver messages to over 200 countries worldwide. that was actually SMS, but mobile push as well is an important part of SNS. If you are storing data in a database, a NoSQL database or a relational database, we've got DynamoDB and we've got Amazon RDS. And then once you've developed your app, if you want to test it, we've got the device farm that offers a large collection of real physical devices that you can connect to remotely and test your device in a large variety of operating systems and carrier implementations. We know that there are a lot of services that you might want to draw on in AWS to develop your app. I just listed a number of them, and we know that there's a lot of those pieces that takes a learning curve to stitch together. And so a great way to think about getting started is use the AWS Mobile Hub. The Mobile Hub gives you a wizard-like interface where you can point and click on different pieces of functionality, like a user sign-in or data storage or content delivery. And it stitches together the resources and the code that you need from your mobile app to access these. So you'll end up with a downloadable mobile app that will demonstrate and give you sample code to use a lot of these services. You can use that as a starting point for your app, or you can use it as a demonstration and then cut and paste, take pieces out of it to incorporate into your own app. But it's a good way to get started and gives you a sample app that's tailored to your account, your resources, and demonstrates how you can use them. Now we're going to focus some more on Cognito. And we think of Cognito in two large pieces. The first is what we call Amazon Cognito Identity, which is really the two pieces on the left. I'm going to start describing the one in the middle, which is federated identities. And the federated identities piece of Amazon Cognito allows you to authenticate or sign in your users through another authentication system or identity provider. That could be Twitter or Facebook or Google or another OpenID Connect provider. It could be your own authentication system. It could be Active Directory with SAML. I'll talk a little bit more about that as a new option we've added. And once those users have authenticated, Cognito allows you to give them credentials that are time-bound and scoped to the permissions that you want to give the users to operate your mobile app. So now your mobile app, when it accesses resources in the back end from AWS or through API Gateway, talk a little bit more of that in a second, you can control those permissions and get those credentials for your users once they've authenticated. And I mentioned SAML. I want to highlight a little bit more about SAML. A lot of our customers a lot of companies have their employees in Microsoft Active Directory or AD. And SAML, if you're using AD through ADFS, is a way that you can now authenticate your users in your existing AD infrastructure and use that authentication with Cognito to then grant them access to your mobile app. So they can use their existing credentials that you have already in Active Directory and use those now in your mobile app through Amazon Cognito. So that's the federated identities piece. If I look to the left, the piece that we've added most recently is your user pools. It's currently in public beta, and that allows you to create your own user directory and your own ability to have users have accounts that they sign up for and sign into in a managed directory that we run for you. So you can use these two pieces together. You can authenticate with a user pool, and then you can use the federated identities to get credentials through AWS. And I'll talk some more about that in a little bit. The other piece of Amazon Cognito is Amazon Cognito Sync. And Cognito Sync gives you the ability to very easily synchronize user data to the cloud and across devices. So you have users with preference data or progress that they've made in some workflow, and you want to be able to allow them to move from one device to another. They might have multiple devices, or very frequently if a user is moving from a device because they've upgraded to a new phone, you can have them bring that progress that they've made, those preferences they've expressed, the setup that they've done with them to the new device as soon as they've authenticated and synchronized the device. We have online and offline mode, so they can still access this data when they're offline and then synchronize once they get back online. And you can also use this in two directions. So if you have data or items that you want to add to a user's collection from the server side, you can do that and it'll get synchronized back down then to the devices next time the user syncs. I'm going to focus in now on the identity piece, and I like to describe this in terms of the user experience. I think it makes it much more real to understand what we're talking about. And within Cognito Identity, I talked about the ability to authenticate through third-party identity providers like Facebook or Google. So you can provide that experience as you've seen in a lot of apps these days, for example, sign in with Facebook. Or now with the Your User Pool functionality in Amazon Cognito, you can have users sign up directly with your own accounts, so they can sign up with username and password, and then they can sign in your own now user-managed directory, and that's user pools. And we also have a guest mode for Cognito. So in some applications, if a user starts and initially doesn't want to make the commitment of linking to Facebook or signing up and giving a username, you want to let them get started with less friction, you can have them start as a guest, and they can have a different set of perhaps scoped down permissions based on guest access, and you can link that guest access or guest account to an authenticated account if they authenticate in the future. And all of these choices are up to you as a developer. You can offer one or multiple of these as you see fit for your application. Now on the right-hand side, what we're showing is that Cognito Identity is going to take the authenticated user or the guest user, and it's going to provide those temporary credentials so that they can securely access your resources. So maybe your app is connecting directly to S3 or to DynamoDB, and you get those credentials to do that with the permissions that you set. Or maybe your app is going to connect to some other services, either your own on-prem or perhaps in API Gateway. Very commonly, these could be a Lambda function, but you can use API Gateway again with those temporary credentials to provide the access that you want to your back-end supporting services. Some of the pieces, the main parts, or the three parts that Cognito User Pools delivers are listed here on this slide. So these are the ones I want to emphasize one more time. The first is easy user management. So you've got the ability to add sign up and sign in very easily to your mobile and web app. And many times, by the way, I want to pause and point out that this isn't just for mobile apps, but also for web apps. And we have JavaScript SDKs and a lot of use cases that are really applicable to as much to web apps as they are to mobile apps. So easy user management is one of the key deliverables. You've got that managed user directory that's underlying it that I've mentioned. You've got a simple way to set up a secure, low cost, and it's fully managed. You don't think you need to think about scaling. It scales to hundreds of millions of users. So we manage and run this for you. It is, I want to emphasize though, your directory. These are your users. They're not shared with anybody else. It's just our service that runs it for you. And a key piece of Cognito and an emphasis for us is also security. Given this is authentication and usernames and passwords, security is one of our top priorities. And one of the ways we express that is through some of the security features. So we give you ways of verifying phone numbers and email addresses automatically, and we give you multi-factor authentication as a way of increasing the security for users signing up or signing in. And I'll talk some more about other security in a moment. I want to go through some of the comprehensive user scenarios. So we've spent a lot of time building a lot of features that you need in a user directory, in a sign up and sign in service, so that it's fully functioning. And for many users or many developers, really the out-of-the-box functionality should be all you need. I'll talk about some ways in a little bit about extending that, but first starting with these built-in functionalities. Of course, you can sign up and sign in your users. You can do that using username and password. We also have the ability to use email or phone number instead of a username, and we'll talk about that. I mentioned the ability to automatically verify email address and a phone number. And you see this pretty commonly these days. If you're asking a user for an email address, for example, you want to verify that. And the way we do that is by sending a code to that email address that the user can then enter to verify either email or their phone number. We have the workflows that are necessary, like changing a password, forgetting a password, so that users can self-serve and take care of those things for themselves. Each user has a profile, so when they sign up or later when they come back to use the app, they can enter and update information. You can also create custom attributes, so we've got a pretty rich set of built-in attributes, but you can add custom attributes on top of that. And we've got SMS-based MFA. I mentioned this on the last slide. So multi-factor authentication through SMS. This is the ability to add additional security when a user signs in, that they can get a code to their phone to really add that extra authentication factor for added security. Now, as the administrator, you get some other features so that you can manage this user directory yourself. And again, this is your user directory. We are running this in the background for you. Our goal here is to give you all the tools to run this yourself. And from the user's perspective, you can do all the branding, all the labeling, so that this is, from the user's perspective, your service, not AWS service. We just run it for you in the background and make it easy. So of course you can start off by creating and configuring user pools. You can have multiple user pools in your AWS account. You can manage your users by listing them, searching them, performing actions like disabling or deleting or verifying or confirming on the users in a user pool. You can make choices in how you want to verify or not verify email and phone numbers. I'll show you some of those as we go through the console. But all of these things I talked about are options that you can configure. The way that you can do a lot of advanced customization of user pools is by using Lambda triggers. And I'll show you some examples or list of the triggers that you can create and how you can customize your workflow. Again, a lot of developers won't need to take this step, but we offer this if you've got a unique or an advanced use case, so you can tailor it to your specific needs. There are password policies that you get to control, so you can specify how rigorous you want your password requirements to be in terms of length or inclusion of special characters. I'll show you that, but you get to choose what's right for your app. And you can define the attributes, whether they're required for sign up or if there are custom attributes that you want to add in addition to the attributes that are built in, or the standard attributes as we call them. Touching back on security, again, it's a key focus for us as we build user pools. It starts with tokens, token-based authentication. They're based on OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 standards. We use a password protocol called SRP, or Secure Remote Password, when a user is signing in. SRP allows us to verify a password when a user signs in without ever transmitting the actual password over the wire. So we do some math and some crypto to verify the password, but never have to send that. And that's something we think is a really nice security feature. And I've mentioned SMS-based multi-factor authentication multiple times, but that's one that you can choose if you want to make it required or optional for individual users, and you have that option out of the box to use text-based SMS MFA. Now here are the Lambda hooks that I mentioned a bit ago. If you want to do some advanced customization, or if you have a use case which is a little bit unique, we have 5 of these defined today, and we're adding more that will be available as we get to GA, or general availability. So the first one listed here is the pre-user sign up. This Lambda function gets a chance to inspect all the attributes that a user has provided when they sign up, and it can decide whether or not it wants to validate that request or do some advanced validation of the attributes. We also have a custom message Lambda hook that allows you to customize the messages. For example, when you're verifying email or phone number, there's a message surrounding that when we deliver the code. And you get this option for customizing those messages. I'll show you in the console there's actually a simpler template-based method, but if you want to do something that's dynamic, perhaps localizing for a different language or doing a database lookup for some reason, you have that ability to do an advanced customization. We have a pre-user sign-in. So before a user signs in, you can do some additional custom validation to accept or deny the sign-in request. We have a post-user sign-in Lambda trigger. For example, if you wanted to log some event or do some custom analytics. And we also have a post-confirmation Lambda trigger. And I'll talk a little bit about the stages of a user lifecycle from first registering to then confirming. But once they have been confirmed, this Lambda trigger is fired, and you can do some customization, for example, send a welcome email or do some event logging or other custom analytics. So you've got options there too. This slide goes into a little bit more of the details of how an app would use a user pool, as well as then how it would use the federated identities piece of Cognito or to access AWS resources. So let me step through this to give you a little bit more of that detail. So if you start with the app on the left-hand side, you've got a user. Again, this could be a web app or a tablet or a mobile app. And when they first sign in, they're signing in here with your user pools. So they provide their username and password, and they get back a number of tokens. These are JWT tokens. They are access and ID tokens back after a user has authenticated. Those come back to your app. And then your app can use Cognito federated identities or an identity pool with that ID token. So it submits the ID token to Cognito federated identities, and it gets back those AWS scope credentials. So now you've got those credentials that are time-bound, and they are tied to the permissions that you have defined for the role of the users of your app. And that dictates what permissions then that mobile app has on the user's behalf to your backend resources. It could be S3, DynamoDB, or API Gateway. So that's the flow going through sign in, getting the credentials, and then accessing the resources on the back. You don't have to use all these pieces together. So Cognito User Pools itself is an identity provider. It could be a standalone identity provider. You could use it independent of any other AWS resources if you choose to. But these are all options that can be used together. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the demo as I briefly sign in here again. Okay, great. Let me take a quick look here. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is the management console for a lot of AWS resources. I talked about how many we have. I highlighted some of the ones that you can see here in the mobile services category. And I'm going to dive in now to the Cognito console and show you a little bit about how to set up a user pool. In the Cognito console, you get a choice to first work on user pools or to work with federated identities. I talked about those two pieces of Cognito identities. And we're going to go into user pools today. And we'll start off with a list of your user pools. I've got one here set up for the demo that I'm going to come back to. But I'm going to walk through first how you would create a user pool to show you some of the settings. And really, it's quite easy to do and all the options that you get. So let's start here with just giving this a name. And you get a choice of whether or not you want to go through and just review the defaults. And if you're comfortable with the defaults, it's a very easy way to get started. Or you can go through the individual settings, and I'll go through those just to show them to you today. Either way, you get a choice to change the defaults or to stick with them. So the first thing that I'm showing you here is the Attributes tab. And the list in the middle is the list of all the standard attributes that are OpenID Connect claims. So you can choose any of these, whether or not they're required for the user or whether or not they're an alias. And I'll explain aliases some more in a little bit. But you can choose, for example, here I've got email required. All of these values are always available. So for any user from your app, you can provide a value for all of these attributes. But when you check them as required, that means that you're going to have to provide a value for the user to sign up. So if it's important that every user has an email address, for example, you can check that as required, and then everyone would be forced to provide one at the service level to make sure that you've got that user attribute integrity. You've also got the ability to add custom attributes, and you can simply choose if you want to use a string or a number. So maybe I want to make this the customer ID, for example, if I already have a customer ID, and I can change the length of the string. I can change whether or not it can be changed after the fact. Maybe I don't want to allow that to be changed after the fact. So I can add multiple attributes, and I can change some of the settings on those attributes. Then I'm going to move on to the next step. So these are your password strength options. We default and we recommend that you consider strong passwords, but you have the option because it really varies for what makes sense for your application. If it's a casual game and you don't want to make it difficult for people to use a password or create a password that maybe they won't remember, you can relax a lot of these settings and make it a lot easier to sign in. Or if you've got an application where perhaps you've got more sensitive information that you're protecting or resources, you can enforce stronger password requirements. This verification panel covers some of the settings for MFA and for email and phone number verification. It starts at the top here with MFA, and you get the choice of having it off for your user pool, make it optional, so user by user, each user can decide, or you can choose for each user whether or not they have MFA turned on, or you can set it required for all of your users, for example. When you have MFA turned on, you get the option of customizing the message that comes with the code when it's sent to their phone versus an SMS text. So this is the easy template way you can customize the message. I mentioned before there's also the Lambda custom message trigger if you want to do something more advanced. And now if you're going to verify phone or email, you also get options there to customize those messages. So for email, you can customize your subject and your message. And I'll give you a quick preview. When we're in GA, you'll also be able to customize the from address for your email address, for the emails they're sent from. For SMS, you can customize the message as well. And again, you could have done this through that custom message Lambda hook as another option. We have the concept of an app within a user pool, and this panel has those settings. An app we think of as, say, an Android app, or it could be a web app or an iOS app. You can create multiple apps for each user pool, and this setting gives that app permission to use the user pool. So if maybe I'm going to add an app here for an iOS app, and I'm going to, in this case, generate a secret, which you can come back and use. And you would use this ID and the secret within your app to give the app permission to use the user pool. So I could click create, and as it says, you can come back later to pick up that secret. And then the last tab here on the panel is the triggers tab before review. This is where you can set those 5 current Lambda triggers. So you can click the drop down here and choose whatever Lambda trigger that you've created. You can go over to the Lambda console itself in order to set those up and to manage those, and then just simply choose them here again for that advanced customization that I've talked about. And once I've gone through those steps, rather quickly, as you've seen, you're ready to create your user pool. Now, you can review and go back if you want to, or if you're set, you can go ahead and create the pool. I'm actually going to cancel this one as I was just going through it as a way of demonstrating the setup. But I'm going to show you a little bit more in this demo pool that I have set up previously. So the main thing I want to highlight is that once you have an active pool and you have users in the pool, you have this user tab as well. And this gives you a listing of the users in the pool. You can click on a user and you can see their attributes. You can change whether or not MFA is enabled in this case, or you can confirm them, or you can disable and delete them. So you can control your users from there. And now what I want to do is switch over to the other part of my demo, which is an example of an Android app that is going to use this demo user pool. So as you see, I've got just a simple interface here for signing in. I'm going to go to the sign up screen and create a quick user here. Give myself a password. As you can see, it's a pretty simple one. So I'm Tim. I'm going to the next screen here for the next one here for email. So I'm just going to actually in this case put in a simple email address. And then I'm going to enter my phone number. Now, I have made a little bit of a change to this app so that I can demonstrate the use of a phone number without actually showing everybody my real personal phone number. So what I'm doing here is putting in basically a placeholder number. And what I've done in the code of the app is I've actually just hard-coded my real phone number, because what I'm going to do is do the phone number verification for this app. So now I submit my new user sign up, and it's telling me that I'm ready to confirm my code. I'll get a code sent to my phone. I can come back here. I'm going to refresh this screen, and you'll see now I have Tim Hunt, or Tim123, and I'm in that unconfirmed status. So you can't tell on the webinar, but I did, while I was talking, get a text message that has the code. So give me a second as I enter that code. Let's see, it is 253834. Click confirm. Success, I've been confirmed. Now if I go back to my console, you can see, in fact, it had already updated, so Tim Hunt's confirmed. So it's really that easy to set up a user pool, and that's an example of where you would use it from an Android app. We have that app that I was demonstrating available as open source on GitHub. We have an iOS version as well. The one I was doing was Android. We have more recently added a JavaScript through Angular 2 example. So you can grab these examples and see the working code used to create that app and to get you started. So let's switch back over to the slides. Thank you. Okay, great. So these are a few more areas I wanted to drill into to give you a little bit more information. And the first one is user status. I talked about that a little bit as we went through, but it's useful to understand this as the life cycle of a user. So it starts when they sign up, they become a registered user. And when you're registered and not yet confirmed, you can't sign in yet. So the way you can have your users automatically confirmed through the built-in functionality is either by verifying the email or the phone number that's provided for the user. And you saw in the demo that I just did that by verifying my phone number. So those are built-in ways that you can verify and confirm users. If you don't want to verify email or a phone number, you can use one of those Lambda triggers I mentioned. It's the pre-sign-up trigger. And in that, you can automatically confirm all users immediately as they sign up. And so you get that choice. Once a user is confirmed, then they can sign in, and you can get those ID and access tokens and use them for the user for their session once they're confirmed, as I mentioned. You can also then disable a user and you saw those buttons in the console. And once a user is disabled, they can be deleted. Now we make that a two-step process on purpose so that we help you avoid accidental deletions. So users must first be disabled before they can be deleted. So that's the user status in the user lifecycle. The next area I wanted to drill into a little bit was verifying email and phone numbers. And you saw this in action. We've got the built-in functionality for verifying both email addresses and phone numbers. And a 6-digit code is sent to your email or to your phone number. When you send it to phone, it comes via SMS text. As I think I mentioned earlier, our SNS service that offers now global SMS provides that service worldwide to over 200 countries. So we've got you covered in worldwide coverage of the ability to send those SMS messages. And at the API level, you submit those codes through the Verify User Attribute API. And once you've done that, we automatically will verify, mark that attribute as verified with that email or phone, and will automatically confirm that user. Now you can have, as you might have seen or noted in the console, both email and phone set up to be automatically verified. And if a user signs up and provides both when they sign up, then we will send the code automatically to their phone. And we'll focus on the phone for verifying the user and confirming them. But your app can still manage the user experience to verify that email address if you provided both. And whenever you get user information from your app, you get back information letting you know in your app if there's any attribute that's awaiting verification. And when you do that, then you can kick off that verification for, say, the email in this case by get user attribute verification code to initiate the verification. I wanted to spend a few minutes on this next topic, which is aliases. I mentioned that briefly in the console. You might have seen those checkboxes along the attributes. Aliases is the term that we use in Amazon Cognito to allow your users to sign in using something other than their username. So traditionally, you would sign in with a username and password. But more and more these days, you might want to use an email address, for example, or even a phone number instead of a separate username. So users don't have to necessarily remember what their username is. They're very likely to remember what their email address is. And aliases gives you that ability for a user to sign in with, again, any field that you've marked as an alias, could be email or username. Now, when you sign up a user using the SDKs, you must provide a username whether or not you really want to use that with your app and expose it to your end user. But it doesn't have to be exposed to your end user. So you can have your user sign up providing just an email and a password, and your app can generate, maybe as a global unique ID, your own username that it's submitted. And you don't need to ever expose that to the user. When the user comes back, they can provide their email address again and sign in if that email address is an alias. But every user does have to have a username, and that's a unique way that you can always refer to that user. If you're tracking a user or if you're linking perhaps to information you have elsewhere in a database, you can always use that username field as the user identifier, whereas an email address, for example, can change. And this arrangement also gives us that ability that if a user signs up and uses their email address as the way they sign up and sign in, they can still change their email address. We haven't just forced it into the username and made it something that can't change in the future. They can still use their email as an email. They can still change it and still use it as a login. And same thing for the phone number. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that if you're using email or phone number as an alias, they must be unique. That means that no other user can have the same phone number or email. And that's important because users are now going to use this as their identifier when they're signing in. You know, it's their email address and their password, for example. So we have to make sure that there aren't two users that have the same email address. And also, the email and the phone must be verified before a user can use it as an alias. Again, this is an identifying factor now, and so we want to make sure that the user actually does own that phone number or that email address through that automatic verification process I've demonstrated before they can use it as an alias. So on this slide, I have some pointers, a link to our website for where you can get some resources to get started. We have what we consider higher level SDKs for iOS, Android, and JavaScript that make it easy and more convenient to use user pools if you're building an iOS, Android, or JavaScript app or web app. So they make things like signing in a user using that SRP protocol easy and transparent, whereas under the covers they're doing a bit of math and making multiple API calls to make that happen. So those SDKs make that easy for you. I've also mentioned that we've got the sample apps. I demonstrated the Android one. We've got an iOS one. We also have that JavaScript Angular 2 example that we just recently posted at GitHub. And you can find information about these at GitHub, and also we've got a blog article to describe them. We've got, of course, a developer guide where we go through all the features and all of the use cases or all the functionality that you need to understand, as well as the underlying API and a reference guide for that API. So all of this you can get started with from that Amazon /Cognito/dev resources link on our website. So thank you. That covers the content that I wanted to share with everyone today. We have some time for some questions. Okay, so give me a second as we pull up some questions. A lot of these, again, people are doing a great job entering questions into the chat, and we've been answering these as we've gone through. Let me just maybe pull up a few here and highlight them. Give me a second to find a good one to start with. Yeah, so here's a question, which is, can a user update a phone number in the future? And the answer there is yes, absolutely. So you can sign up with a phone number and get that verified. A user can also change that phone number in the future. When they do, they can then also re-verify that number. But absolutely, yeah, you can update those phone numbers. So there's a question about how you can customize the Cognito sign up and sign in UI to look and match your actual app. And that's an important thing to clarify, which is that you as the developer own the user interface when you use Amazon Cognito. So we've given you some sample apps that you can use as a starting point, but that ultimately is your code. So you can change that any way you want. And then you use our SDKs to link that into our service. So to be clear, we're not giving you a hosted user experience, although in the future we may move there. Today, whether it's a mobile app or a web app, that user interface is yours to own. You can customize it any way you want. You can change the flows in lots of different ways. And then you use our SDKs and they're able to link that into the Cognito service. There's a question about whether or not I have customers all over the world and whether or not I can localize the messages. I showed you the two ways of customizing messages. One of them was the templates, and the second one was the custom message Lambda trigger. It's that second method, the custom message Lambda trigger, that you can use to customize your messages based on the locale of your user. There's another question about whether it's possible to integrate user pools with federated identities without enabling access to unauthenticated users for a user pool. And the answer is yes, you get that control. So when you configure an identity pool in Cognito, you can choose through a checkbox in the console whether or not you're going to allow unauthenticated access. And as I mentioned before, you get to choose any of these options. You're in control as a developer. So if you only want to use a user pool, so your users have to sign up and sign in directly with you, you can do that and only allow that as an authentication provider for an identity provider. You could also choose or choose not to add in a social identity provider, for example, or that guest access. You get to choose all of those options. So there's a question about where is the working code that I referred to. It's in GitHub, and if you go to the Cognito portion of the AWS website and you find that developer resources link, look down for a link to the sample apps. And there's one link there right now for iOS and for Android. And those will take you right to GitHub, where you can find the code that I demonstrated. I think it's actually evolved a little bit since the portion that I've demonstrated, but that's where you can find it. There's a question about whether everything in the console is available through APIs, and the answer is yes. I will talk a little bit more about the difference of the APIs now to maybe add a little bit more understanding for you, but the simple answer to the direct question is yes, everything you can do. Those are all things I would consider more administrative type functions, and those are all available through the APIs. Now, we have two types of SDKs when it comes to Cognito. We have the standard Amazon SDKs for things like Java and Ruby and PHP, typically more server-side SDKs, and those support the underlying APIs. And then we have also, for Cognito, we have what we sometimes call the mobile SDKs, or sometimes we refer to them as a higher level SDK, and those are for iOS, Android, and JavaScript. And those provide some of the methods that make it easier to do things like sign in a user using SRP. One distinction that exists today while we're in public beta is that those APIs that are end user related to sign in are currently not available in the standard Amazon SDKs while we're in beta period. So you can use those standard Amazon SDKs in Java, PHP for things like administrator functions. You can't use them today to sign in a user. That's a temporary situation while we're in public beta because we've been making some adjustments and expanding those APIs. And once we get to general availability or GA, which I can't give you a specific timeline, but I can say we're working well along the way there. It's not the too distant future at this point. And once we get to that point, all of the standard SDKs will provide the API support for all that functionality. There still may be a distinction for some SDKs about whether or not we have some of the higher level convenience functions that, for example, support SRP. That kind of functionality will be possible from all the SDKs, but it may be easier in some SDKs where we provided some helper functions, and we'll look over time to expand the examples and the sample code that makes that easier in a broader array of languages. Okay, so there's a question about access control once a user is logged in through Cognito. and how can that be leveraged in an application. So we have role-based permissions control when a user authenticates and you use Cognito identity pools, then grant those credentials. So for most identity providers today, we provide two roles. We have an authenticated role and an unauthenticated role. So if a user has, say, authenticated with Facebook, they can, or your own identity provider, they get one set of permissions which you define in the IAM role for authenticated users. And if you want to allow that guest mode where a user hasn't signed in yet but wants to get access, there's a separate role you can define for that that can give them different, probably more limited permissions. We've recently launched SAML, as I mentioned, and today, somewhat unique to the SAML approach, you can have multiple roles for authenticated users. So this is important, particularly in the SAML use cases where you have a maybe business to employee use case, and you want different employees based on what groups they might be in to have different permissions within your app. So when you're using SAML with Amazon Cognito, you can define in your SAML assertion, in your identity provider, perhaps that could be Active Directory or ADFS, you can define what IAM roles you want different users to have. And when they get those credentials to Amazon Cognito, that is the role that will be assigned to them to manage their different permissions. So there's a question about using apps and the secret that you get as an app with a customer as a way to enable programmatic access without having to log in via a web page or a mobile app. Well, I would say that you would use the app and the app ID and the app secret as a way to enable an app to access your user pool. And then within that app, you would have users that would use their username or their email and their password. So that is a way that you can give different apps the ability to access your user pool. You still would then have a user that's authenticated by providing a username and a password. Okay, everybody, I think we're going to end the Q&A there. I appreciate all the good questions. And if you have more questions, we've got a discussion forum for Cognito, which is a great way to get questions answered. And again, look at our documentations and our getting started information. And I hope that you find what you're looking for. Amazon Cognito is, the user pools function, like I mentioned, is currently in public beta. We are heading towards the GA in the not too distant future, and you'll see some expansion of some new features coming up there that we're pretty excited about, and hopefully it won't be too long until we can tell you about those. So thank you, everybody.
Great. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our presenter Tim for his time and a great presentation, and to Vikram and David for answering the audience's questions. If you have any comments on previous and upcoming webinars or suggestions on topics you'd like AWS to cover in future webinars, please send us an email at aws-webcasts@amazon.com. That's also there in the Q&A pod, but again, that's aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Your feedback will help us to improve our webinar programming. Thanks to our audience for taking the time to join us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.